looking forward to this study with you. I love this book for a number of reasons. Its practicality, its helpfulness, just generally, of course. I also love it because I feel like out of the longer books, I've spent a good bit of time in it, and so it regularly ministers to me. I think I've mentioned before that I think one of the best things that my dad ever did, as far as a really intentional step of spiritual mentorship with my brother and I, is my junior year of high school, and it would have been my brother's senior year of high school. We went through Proverbs 10 times in the summer between semesters. We read it 10 times together. And we would just once a week at breakfast or whatever, we would talk about what we read. And that was such a formative time for me in learning to be a young man. And one of the things we're gonna learn a lot about, just kind of how to look at Proverbs and how to read Proverbs, because it's a different animal, even in the Psalms. So we just recently spent a lot of time in the Psalms on Wednesdays, but Proverbs is even different from the Psalms. So it is biblical poetry, but it reads different than the Psalms. It's intending to do something different than the Psalms do. The Psalms are fundamentally what? They're hymns. They're intended for praise, or they're spiritual meditations. And so tonight we're going to look at the function of the book of Proverbs, because that's what chapter 1 of Proverbs does. It gives us a foundation for how to read the rest of the book. So Proverbs breaks down interestingly, really chapters 1 through 8 of Proverbs 1 through 8, are introductory material. And then all of 9 and following are the actual Proverbs. So when I say Proverbs, another way to hear that is the idea of sayings or wise sayings. And so Proverbs is not just it's not just what Master Yoda would say. Really interesting, kind of pithy, good information. It's actually spiritually intended wise sayings that are based in something. And we have to really understand what the basis of that is. And so that's what chapter 1 of Proverbs really gives time to. What is the basis of these Proverbs? And the basis of these Proverbs is true, biblical, godly wisdom. And then even further than that, where does that come from? What is godly wisdom? How do we attain godly wisdom? How do we grow in godly wisdom? And that's what chapter 1 is going to do for us. And so chapter 1 is going to be where we spend all of our time this evening. We're not going to work through it verse by verse, obviously. We're going to look at the overview and the structure of the passage, and we're going to park on some verses that help us understand the whole of the book and kind of give us some keys to helping us unlock Proverbs. Wisdom is something that man has been after since Jesus and before, but especially when we think about the ancient world and Jesus, the life of Greece and Rome following Jesus, this commitment to philosophy and growing in wisdom, and then we've seen iterations of what it means to grow in wisdom throughout history, and maybe you can think about the philosophical enlightenment that took place in the 1700s and 1800s, and as man attempts to think about their life, they've always wanted to do it with wisdom. And we do get a lot of that foundation from ancient philosophy. But there's been different types of wisdom throughout history, or different orientations to wisdom is probably the better way to say that. We're not going to go through. There's not going to be any philosophy tonight, don't worry. But I did want to read a Forbes article, not read, I want to reference a Forbes article that I found several weeks ago in preparation for this. And this is a recent article written by a PhD professor, and he is going to give us some ways that we can become wise, what it takes to grow in wisdom, or 5 admonitions or instructions is a better way to say it because it's not biblical, to grow in wisdom. Okay? And the first one is to acknowledge others' points of view. Now, I can get on board with you with that one a little bit. Because it means when I acknowledge others' point of view, it means that I'm not seeing myself as the end-all authority. But I have to run my point of view and others through a grid, don't I? Okay, so we acknowledge others' points of view. This is such a stereotypical article. I mean, we've got 5 ways to grow in wisdom, and there's a big owl right in the front. I think owls are awesome, by the way. Owls are incredible animals. Be aware of varied contexts. It's like, I don't even know what that means, right? No. It has the idea that we need to make sure we're not just imposing our own context and our own understanding to various circumstances and contexts of life. Okay. I guess I can see the logic of that. Distance yourself. Wise people tend to know their own limitations and the limitations of others, and they distance themselves from those who limit them. Now again, if we're talking about someone who's a bad Christian influence on you, or just a bad influence on you in general, I can get on board. But let me ask you this question. Is the idea of distancing yourself, cutting yourself off from people, is that inherently a biblical idea? No. Because godly people know that to be godly is to be relational. It is to take steps towards people. Now, there are times when we have to cut foolish influences out of our life, but that's not what this is getting at. This is a very self-centered form of distancing myself so that I can have some sort of self-improvement. Trust your gut. Trust your gut. I went out of order because, honestly, some of these are just the same, okay? He's just saying different ways to say the same thing. But his concluding one, in other words, if you're forming an argument, typically you're going to end with your top priority, the one that's most important to you. And so the one that's most important to this PhD professor is trust your gut. Just do what your body or your mind or your heart tells you. Disney would say what? Follow your heart. And so that idea that I can just follow my heart, trust my gut, do whatever I think, what's my moral compass leading me, that is so ingrained in human nature. That's just instinctive to us. And again, I'm not going to go into it, but you could read the ancient philosophers, and the foundation of those who would say what wisdom is from a earthly mentality. That's what they would say. Listen to yourself and constantly be improving your life and your relationships so that you can trust yourself. And when I read that, I don't know why, I had Ebenezer Scrooge's words going through my head. Trust your gut, right? What does he say when he sees the ghost of Jacob Marley? The stomach is a fickle thing, right? You could be just a blot of mustard or undercooked potato. Why would we trust what's in here when what's in here consistently proves to make the wrong decision, to go after the wrong things, to do the wrong things? Well, the reason that people continue to do that is because they don't want to seek wisdom God's way. Because to seek wisdom God's way fundamentally assumes resignation of self. We're going to read what scholars refer to as the prologue of the book, the fancy title for the prologue of the book. Proverbs 1, verses 1 through 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So this is what's going to form for us the purpose of the book of Proverbs. And so if you have an outline tonight, or if you want to take notes on an outline, verses 1 through 7 is going to give us the purpose of Proverbs, and then verses 18 to the end of the chapter gives us two profiles. Purpose and profiles. And those two profiles are going to give a contrast. Those who reject the way of wisdom and wisdom itself. But verses 1 through 7 give us fundamentally the purpose of the book. Now we see there, and I told you to give some kind of how we read the book and just some general information, because I wanted to teach chapter 1, similar to what I did this morning. Teach chapter 1 and give kind of flyover information about the book. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Solomon is the predominant writer of the book, but he is not the only writer of the book. We're going to see some Proverbs from others. But he is the predominant writer of the book. And this is the purpose. What are the purpose of these proverbs, of these sayings? To know wisdom, verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction. And wisdom is the operative content. And instruction. This is intellectual, academic. Academics not the best way to say it. Intellectual, mental learning. So there's a balance here. There's wisdom that we're growing in, and there actually is just the exercise of growing in intellect and knowledge, like we talked about this morning. We should be growing in knowledge, and we shouldn't be shying away from that pursuit. It's like, oh, let's let the people smarter than me take care of growing in knowledge. No, let's all grow in our knowledge of Christ. And that's this idea of instruction. I started with a secular article about wisdom. If you read most dictionary definitions of wisdom, again, those are secular sources. They may have somewhat biblical, very, very, very deep undertones. But almost all of them actually apply the aspect of experience or the application of knowledge to wisdom. And I think that there is biblical credence for doing that. Maybe you've heard the definition of wisdom. It's not really a definition. It's more like a proverb, actually. Wisdom is knowing, or knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit. And what's the rest of it? Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad, right? And so you have the idea of, I understand it, I know it, and then the application of that knowledge. And that's the balance that we see here. To know wisdom and instruction, what good is having the right ability to process or the right information if you can't rightly apply it to wisdom? But you're not going to have wisdom without the pursuit of knowledge, without the pursuit of growing in our minds and the retention of information. And so let me encourage you not to shy away from this idea of growing in knowledge. Sometimes I think that we really think that it's for the seminarians, it's for the pastors, it's for the academics. Well, people are overcomplicating it. We're all dividing over theology and whatever. And I think sometimes that's just our way of saying that knowledge threatens me, that pursuit threatens me, and so I'm not going to go after it. When actually, the more that we understand the pursuit of knowledge, especially theological knowledge, I think as we grow in that knowledge and as we apply that knowledge, we find that that's what unifies us. And the reaction to that may actually indicate problems with me, not problems with the information itself. So to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight. So the writer has information that we don't have. This is why, as I said from the outset, biblical wisdom causes the resignation of rights. It means that if I'm going to learn biblical wisdom, my teacher has insight that I don't have, and I need to be okay with that. And the Bible forces me to resign myself to that truth. That's what it is to be a disciple, as we've said repeatedly recently. To be a disciple means that I want Jesus to teach me, and I want others who represent Jesus to teach me. Biblical wisdom fundamentally calls me to the recognition that I don't know everything. And not only am I okay with that, I welcome that reality. Because then I'm allowing biblical wisdom and those wiser than me, with more experience than me and insight than me, to speak into me. And how often is our reaction to something, maybe something that is totally normal, or maybe something that pushes on our paradigms or our views, how often is our reaction to that thing solely based on our understanding of that thing? Here's what I think, here's my experience, here's my opinion, and we only apply self to the consideration. That is not the response of biblical wisdom. We'll find in chapter 23 that, do you see a man who's wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than him. Which, by the way, in that chapter, he spends several verses talking about the condemnation of the fool. So worse than the fool in Proverbs is the intellectually or circumstantially or experientially proud, who's unwilling to receive instruction. In righteousness, justice, verse 3, and equity. What happens when wisdom is rightly applied? The righteousness of God is on display, the justice of God is on display, and the equity of God is on display. Actually, things turn out to be just and right when we apply God's wisdom. Perhaps the most dramatic example of this, and it's an exaggerated story on purpose because the writer is actually pointing to the immediate byproduct of justice and equity, and I'm not going to say fairness, justice and equity as a result of God's wisdom, is in that account where Solomon, the child, but the one pretending to be the baby's mom and one actually the baby's mom is brought to Solomon. And Solomon comes up with this crazy idea to see which mom's going to have the stronger reaction and who's going to be more sacrificial, because no mother wants any child to come to harm, their child to come to harm. And on the basis of that reaction, he rightly discerns the mother. And so what is the application there? It's the application of God's wisdom that results in common sense. And then the use and application of that common sense resulting that is a result of God's wisdom actually accomplishes justice. Do you see that? Truth outs in that story. Because the right application of biblical wisdom results in truth and justice. Let the wise, verse 4, to give prudence to the simple. Okay, so we're going to see three categories of people who need to learn in Proverbs. And I told you I can give you lots of tips and tricks for how to read and understand Proverbs. Three categories of people who need to learn in Proverbs: the simple, the fool, and the scorner. And we've seen the simple, and we see the simple in verse 4. To give prudence, that's the application of wisdom, to the simple. Do you know what simple means here? Stupid. The dumb people, the people who need to use their brains. When you hear simple, think mentally deficient. When you hear fool, think morally deficient. So these are the people that maybe they're just inexperienced. They just need to learn to use their brains. When I'm preaching to teenagers, my favorite example of the simpleton was I was helping with a middle school outreach one time in college. And I think I've told you, I call middle schoolers the human larva stage, right? They're just still developing mentally, physically, emotionally. I mean, you know how every once in a while they'll just do something that's just dumb? Be gracious. Like their brain is actually forming, okay? Did you know, by the way, that there's psychological studies and physiological, not just psychological studies, physiological studies that shows over the last few decades that the age that the brain is still developing is getting later and later? Did you know that? So now they're saying someone's brain, they used to say like college, and immediately after college and early 20s is when someone's brain is like what we think fully developed. Not that they're using it fully, but fully developed. That age is getting later and later. And do you know what what they say the primary cause is? Guess. Screens. Not just cell phones. Screens in general. And it's not just because of the effect of screens. It's that we have an excuse not to use our brains. You don't have to go to the library anymore. You just Google it. And so I sound like someone who just doesn't like culture right now. But considering this conversation, maybe that's a very relevant conversation. Anyway, this story. Back to my story. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I feel bad for him, but it's really funny. This kid, I can't remember his name. I wish I could. I know he's in 7th grade. He was running around. And he's just running around like crazy, and I hear him go, "Yeah, chest bump with the ground." And he goes, and he just belly flops on the pavement. Chest bump with the ground. Just bam! And you don't want to laugh, but you kind of have to. And he gets up and he goes, "Ah!" It's like, dude, what went through your brain? And what do you think he said? I don't know. It's like, I know. Nothing went through your brain. You didn't think at all, right? That's the simpleton. They just don't think. And they're still growing in their ability to apply knowledge and apply wisdom. We see this in children all the time. Why do children do stuff that doesn't make sense? They're simple. They lack experience. And that should cause, in many cases, now if it becomes an outright discipline issue where they're just intentionally not learning or trying not to learn, that's one thing. But in many cases, a child being simple should cause us to be compassionate, not just frustrated and inconvenienced. But this is the simple. And the simple, they need to grow in prudence and knowledge. And they need to grow in knowledge and discretion. It doesn't just say they need common sense, it says they need knowledge and discretion to the youth, the inexperienced. I said something to my wife the other day, and it's not profound. It's actually deeply biblically proverbial. In other words, the Proverbs bear this out. When people don't think biblically, they don't think at all. See what I said? When people don't think biblically, they don't think at all. Because they begin to operate outside of God's basic function for how we apply knowledge and wisdom. And then common sense goes out the door with them. Which is why there's a connection to knowledge and the application of that knowledge. Common sense. Let me bring it down to earth. When was the last time you were fearful about something and it actually caused you not to think clearly? Fear will cause us to think irrationally faster than anything. Fear will cause us to react and say the craziest things, so that we're actually not even applying common sense to a situation, much less spiritual sense. Anger. How many of you have done, and you have to raise your hand, done or seen someone do something in anger that caused damage, like actual damage? Something got broken. Someone's fists went through a television. Someone's whatever. You broke something. What were you doing? You weren't thinking. Why? Because something caused you to not think. So we threw biblical knowledge and biblical wisdom right out the window, and we didn't even apply common sense, much less spiritual sense. When people don't think biblically, they will end up not thinking at all. So what content are you regularly taking in? Who are your teachers? Is the news causing you to be fearful? Are other influences or people where maybe negativity gets cycled, causing you to not think carefully? Media. Now, the teens are downstairs, and so I'm assuming, Instagram and TikTok aren't your primary teachers, but is social media sucking you in? Because that teaches you something. We're all being discipled by something. We just need to make sure it's the right things. What about the wise? The wise are good, right? The wise people, they've got it figured out, and life's good for them. Verse 5, let the wise hear and increase in learning. Do you know what simple people need to do? Grow in wisdom. Do you know what wise people need to do? Grow in wisdom. Verse 7, I told you that this is going to give us the purpose. Well, we've seen the purpose. It's to teach the simple, and it's to help the wise grow in wisdom. What is wisdom, and where does it come from? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So, where does wisdom come from? Well, it comes from knowledge. And what does knowledge accomplish in our hearts? It accomplishes wisdom. It grows in us wisdom as we grow in instruction, because it's the fools, and there's another category of people that we learn from, that despise wisdom and instruction. So verse 7 actually sets out for us the contrast that moves us to what true wisdom is. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and who rejects wisdom? Foolish people. So how do we have access to the wisdom that the fools are rejecting? The fear of the Lord. It's the beginning of knowledge. And it's what allows access to the receiving of God's wisdom, to the growing in God's wisdom. Now, this fear is important that we understand it. Perhaps you come from maybe a hyper-conservative or maybe even a Catholic background or something, and you have to do everything to gain favor with God. And that picture of God is that it's either that He's always disappointed in you or that He's always ready to judge you. And so that actually forms and shapes you so that you live with a view of God like He's constantly standing over you with His arms crossed, scowling. Can't measure up. You can't check all the boxes. You can't do it right. And that causes you to live in fear. Is that the gospel? Perfect love, what? Casts out fear. So obviously, fear can't be this kind of dread. Fear here, very simply, is reverential awe. Reverence and honor. So, we use this, I asked this question several times when we studied the Psalms. Do you live with an aspect of awe? Maybe you remember that question. Do you live with an aspect of awe? I have it written in the Bible. My dad's, from his study in Proverbs back in Georgia, this statement. I think it's the Bible that I had when I was a teenager, which is the one Leighton's been using occasionally. I have it written next to this. True fear of God doesn't cause us to flee from, but fall before. True fear of God doesn't cause us to flee from, but fall before. Loved one, when was the last time you rightly responded in awe to God? Because there is a seriousness that living in the wisdom of God will bring us. I'm not saying we go around like monks. But there is an aspect of awe that I think that we do not rightly apply to our lives. And I think it's probably because we've cheapened God and we've cheapened even Jesus. We have a very, sometimes, when I say we, I don't want to speak generally. I think today's culture and maybe one of the weaknesses of the church at large is we have a very truncated view of Jesus. He will come to judge the living and the dead. He's a warrior. He will unleash almighty wrath. And our view of Jesus is so mamby-pamby, lovey-dovey. Now, He is gentle and He's tender. He says that, I'm meek and lowly in heart, but He's not only that. And we've taken a very truncated view of Jesus and we've applied it to God. God is all love, and He just wants to love and accept everybody. And we would say, absolutely not, that's heresy. But man, how often do we accidentally live really appreciating His love, but at the complete expense of His holiness and justice and wrath and might and power and majesty, so that we don't live with an aspect of awe? And what happens if we end up in one of those extremes, rather than, to be very philosophical, what Aristotle called the golden mean, right in the middle, with a balance of understanding God, is we either live in fear that God is standing over us, scowling, or worse, or that he's truncated and he needs us, and we sing these cheap praise and worship songs like we're God's our boyfriend, and we have to live in the middle because God brings balance. God is balanced, and so rightly understanding the character of God causes us to say, as I grow to know him, I understand that he is love, and as I grow to know him, I understand that he will bring almighty wrath on sin, and it's deserving. And so, yes, I need to come into his presence as child, but yes, I need to come into his presence with reverence and awe, taking my life seriously. And we can take our lives seriously with joy and laughter. Solomon himself says that a merry heart is good and it brings good like medicine does. And so we should take our life seriously with joy. I've been in the Sermon on the Mount lately, and it does not escape me that 3 sentences in to Jesus saying, this whole message, this whole sermon, greatest sermon ever preached, about what it means to be a true disciple, a true kingdom member. 3 sentences in, what does he say? Blessed are you who mourn over sin. You take yourself and your sin seriously. This is what kingdom people do. But we're not going to take our sin seriously and live a regular, mournful, joyful, again, living in balance, joyful, mournful life of repentance if we don't have a view of God that causes us to reverence and honor him. We're not going to do it. We'll live in a false, superficial extreme that we've created. Does a reverential awe of God cause you to learn of God in a way that you're applying the wisdom of God? So that's the purpose. That's the purpose. And then I told you that there are 2 profiles in chapter 1 to give us a context, or to give us a contrast, to give us a contrast to see what this wisdom looks like. So, tip and trick for Proverbs. 1, we've said we know what these proverbs are. They're spiritual wisdom, and understanding that means we're growing in knowledge. They're seen together. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There are 3 audiences who need wisdom: the fool, or the simple, the fool. We've seen 2 of them so far, and the scoffer, the scorner. Next, kind of key tip and trick for learning or reading Proverbs is in verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction. There are 21 my son passages in Proverbs. Those who are in the young families class, I a while ago, I guess it was a year or so ago, we did just a few Proverbs together, a few my son passages together. One thing that you should remember from the outset of Proverbs, every book has a specific purpose, a specific thing that it's doing. And sometimes it's very specific. There's a specific audience, there's something intended here. One thing that you should remember about the book of Proverbs is that at its core, at its most baseline level, it is a book from a father to a son. And that's one of the reasons I love this book. It's a father who's walked through life saying to his son who's about to walk through life, I want to help you do it wisely. So if you're a parent or a grandparent, or you have an opportunity to influence children, learn the Proverbs to help those younger than you do what Moses says in Psalm 90, get us a heart of wisdom. This is the first verse that my Leighton memorized, that we memorized together. He was just putting words together, and we learned verse 8 through 10. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, forsake not your mother's teaching. For there'll be a garland around your head and a pendant for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, I can still hear Leighton say it, do not consent. Now, I want to press into the imagery. One of the things we have to do in Proverbs is we actually have to look at the poetry. Sometimes it's very straightforward. Sometimes it's, just to be honest, odd. Because there's things in Proverbs, it was written in a culture and an understanding that you and I don't really have, that we don't really live in as much. And so we have to press into the images. And this is the first of our true images that we really have to press into to understand. Hear, my son, your father's instruction and your mother's teaching. Again, the dissemination of information, the giving of information. For the graceful garland for your head and a pendant for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. There's specific poetry here related to the aspect of teaching. And again, our young families class, maybe you remember this. Solomon is saying something specific here, not just general, okay? And he's being the image of the garland. Where does a garland around your head go? Well, it goes around your head. Okay, so what's under the garland on your head, deep down below the skin and, everything? Your mind. And the pendant that's around your neck, well, this is a big manly-looking piece of jewelry that sits at the chest area, around your neck and dangles down to the chest. It's a big kingly jewel. What does that rest right over? Your emotional faculty, your heart. And so actually what the writer is doing is he's saying that your father's teaching and your mother's instruction, they will minister to your head and your heart. They'll, beautify everything about you, mind and soul. Wisdom beautifies a person. Did you hear what I said? Wisdom beautifies a person. Not like chapter 31, where we're reminded that favor is deceitful and beauty is vain. This is true beauty. This is decoration that transforms a person. And so the parental application, and not just the parental application, but the teaching application in general, is that true biblical wisdom instructs the head and appeals to the heart and beautifies both. So as biblical wisdom is taught, as instruction is given, the mind and the ability to process is cultivated, and the soul of a person is grown. So they end up being a beautiful young person, a beautiful child who's growing up hearing this instruction. When you teach your children or your grandchildren, do you actually give the instruction? Now that's important. Do you actually give the instruction? Do you connect the what to the why? Here's what you did and here's why it was good or bad. Because that's the instruction. And do you appeal in that moment to their heart? Do you actually make a heart connection with them? So that you're not just attempting to cram information into somebody's head, but that you actually want the heart to be affected. This is not just parental teaching, this is all true teaching. My preaching teacher in my doctoral program wrote the textbook that I used in college. I remember him saying in lecture one day, no one's heart was ever changed by someone getting their head hammered. No one's heart was ever changed by getting hammered in the head. That's what it was. In other words, you can't just keep hammering information and expect change. But then he was very quick to point out the inverse is true as well. The heart, the head has to be informed so that the heart is affected. Otherwise, we just end up living a life of emotion, don't we? And this looks like what Paul says we should be very wary of, not being tossed to and fro like wind, taking us into false doctrine. And it creeps up faster than you would think. It finds the chink in the armor. And then this profile is given us of sinners. These are the scoffers. These are those who, as I said a moment ago, remember, when you think simpleton, think mentally deficient. When you think fool, think morally deficient. When you hear scorner or scoffer or sinner, think God deficient. They don't want God at all. And actually, as you read Proverbs, you begin to realize, we say things in our again, very maybe accidentally truncated theology. Well, no one's too far gone, and God wants everybody, and there's a sense in which those things are half true. But if you read Proverbs and you read about the scoffers, you really get the sense that there's no hope for them. They're past hope. And the writer wants us to have that impression on purpose, because this is the outright extent of living foolishly. And when you live outright foolishly, you live anti-God. Completely. And as long as we live anti-God, there is no hope. And here, their primary sin, and it's going to take on various forms, but here, their primary sin is violence. If they say, "Come, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent." Now, this is the enticement of sinners from verse 10. "Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive. The whole pit, like those who go down, alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all the precious goods, shall fill our houses with plunder." So we're going to kill them, and then we're going to take their stuff. We're going to steal from them. And then it says, "Throw in your lot among us." Verse 14, "You can have some of the treasure too. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For vain is their net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives." So who's trapped in the end? They are. To live as a scoffer is to live a life repeatedly falling into the trap that you have made for yourself. And then verse 19, we get a glimpse of one of the more practical proverbs. "Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain." This is such a powerful verse. "It takes away the life of its possessors." So think about the image that's being given, these sinful people who enact violence and then steal from those that they commit violence against. Maybe just think, it's more aggressive than this, but maybe think muggers, okay, in our vernacular. It's more aggressive than that. And they're doing it. Why are they doing it? Because they're violent and because they're greedy. But in verse 19, it is actually the greed itself that consumes. You think you're possessing, but your sin, your greed is possessing you. The scoffers. Verse 19 certainly warns us against this minimized view of greed that we may accidentally have in our lives. How many of you have read the book Respectable Sins by Jerry Bridges? Anyone ever heard of it? Okay, some of you. Jerry Bridges wrote a book called Respectable Sins, and I love the title. Because to us, what's our immediate reaction to that? No sin's respectable. But he lays the case, and he goes through them, what sins we just kind of act like aren't that big a deal. And greed's one of them. Oh, everybody's greedy in some way. We're all working on that. At least I haven't killed anybody. At least I haven't stolen anything. At least I know I looked at that car with covetousness. I'm speaking to myself. But, at least I didn't go pummel the driver and steal it from him. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It is a fruit of a scoffer. There's no such thing as a little sin. So the first profile given to us is the way of the scoffer, and then the profile given us in the latter part, verses 20 and following, 20 to 33 to the end of the chapter, is the profile of wisdom itself. Wisdom itself. Or Lady Wisdom. Solomon is going to present wisdom in the book as a beautiful woman that you want to follow for good reasons. He's going to contrast her up against women you don't want to follow in chapter 5 and chapter 7. But wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street, she cries out. The entrance of the city gates. She speaks, "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long scoffers will delight? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn up my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand, no one has heeded. Because you have ignored all my counsel. And have none of my reproof. I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm, your calamity comes like a whirlwind. When distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. Then they will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Now, I don't know if you've seen Lord of the Rings, but if you have, or if you haven't, you need to. But if you haven't, there's a part in the Fellowship of the Ring where the elf queen named Galadriel, who in the book, not to get all nerdy, okay, but in the book is presented as like the ultimate source of wisdom and beauty. I mean, and pure, and she's pure in wisdom and beauty, And she gives life later. She gives starlight that's used for a rescue. I mean, so it's almost like Tolkien had someone in mind when he wrote her character. But there's a part in the book where she goes from beauty and radiance and giving wisdom to the main character, Frodo. It happens in the movie too. To like turning. And she becomes terrifying. And her voice changes. And she gives a message of warning. And that's the image that I have in my mind when I read this text. Because you can see it. Wisdom cries aloud on the street. Here's this beautiful light. Here's this beautiful voice. And she's raising her voice in the street. She wants everybody to hear it. And it starts, I mean, she's not so on the nose, but man, does she get on the nose. She just starts by beckoning them, by inviting them, by appealing to them. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? Your scoffers delight in their scoffing. If you turn, you'll have my spirit, and I will make my words known to you. If you turn at my reproof, I will pour out my spirit. Because I have called, and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand, and no one heeded. And it's like she just changes to go from appealing to judging. Righteous judgment. Here's a terrifying warning, and you should listen to it now. She says, I'll laugh when terror strikes you, when calamity comes upon you like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. And remember what I said a few moments ago? If you read about the scoffer, it's almost like they don't have hope. It's almost like they're too far gone. And again, we don't like to think in terms like that because we have a very, whatever our theology is, they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me and they will not find me. Why? Because they're not seeking with humility. If they were humble, they would seek. They're not seeking. You say, well, that doesn't seem very fair of God. What did verse 18 say? They set an ambush for their own life. They did this. This is their lifestyle now. They're just making traps for themselves. Now, there's a way to break the cycle. It's called repentance, but scoffers don't repent. They just fall in their own traps over and over and over again. I just want to note a few things about Lady Wisdom here and make a New Testament parallel, then we'll be done. Note the publicity of her message. She stands at the streets, in the market. She raises her voice. She's not doing this in a vacuum. She wants to be heard. She's over the noisy streets. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries. She wants people to listen to her. She has a message of urgency. And it's almost like our Savior. The wisdom of God, 1 Corinthians 1. Saying in Matthew 10:27 that his message should be proclaimed from the rooftops. And in John 18 where he says, I have spoken openly and kept nothing secret. When Lady Wisdom says, how long, O simple ones, will you continue being simple? We hear this urgency and grief in Matthew 17 from Christ. How long will you continue in your sin? And then what he says to Israel, I would have had you, but you would not. Lady Wisdom says she'll pour out her Spirit. And in John 7, Jesus says he will pour out the water of life, and it is poured out in verses 37 through 39 implicitly through the Spirit. And in Acts 2, the Spirit is poured out. And in Romans 5, Paul says that the love of Christ has been poured into our hearts through God's Spirit. And you would think, Lady Wisdom, I mean, this is just a poem. This is just a personification of wisdom. Now, we could expect people to reject her, but people aren't going to reject Christ. You would think. But in Matthew 25, Jesus tells a parable of a king readying his servants. And in his rebuke of the unready servants, what does he say? He says specifically, they did not pay attention. The Son of God is the wisdom of God rejected. And so we see people reject the wisdom of God for centuries. The ultimate personification of God's wisdom is the person of His Son. And the rejection of the instruction, the wisdom and reverence for God that causes us to live rightly in the fear of God, is a rejection of the person of Christ. For He is the wisdom of God, absolutely and perfectly on display. But loved one, let me ask you this question. If Jesus is the wisdom of God perfectly on display, and He is our master, our discipler, are you listening to Him? Are you receiving instruction from Jesus Christ? We who have claimed to be His? When you read in His Word and it touches on an aspect of your heart, or it threatens one of your idols, or it addresses your fear, or it pushes on an anxiety, or it causes you to recognize an aspect of gossip or slander in your life, do you go to Jesus, the wisdom of God, confess that, and listen, recognizing that in that moment you need instruction, you need wisdom, you need insight? Because if Jesus is our master as the wisdom of God, He's the perfect discipler. Remember what I said at the beginning, that to seek wisdom God's way is to fundamentally be in resignation to God. So to live applying the wisdom of God by following your discipler, Jesus Christ, is to fundamentally live a life of humility. Resigning yourself to the reality and myself to the reality that there's a lot I don't know and 1,000 ways I need to learn. And as God reveals those blind spots to us, we confess and we repent and we ask for wisdom, knowing that when we ask, James tells us He will give it liberally. Now, fair warning as we conclude. If any book holds up the mirror of your blind spots, Proverbs is going to put us through the ringer. Topic after topic, issue after issue, saying, here's where you need instruction, here's where you need insight, here's an aspect of your pride, here's where you're not listening. And so if I can just admonish you something that to pray as we come into this series, that I pray, uh, I'm not going to say every morning because I don't want to lie. Almost every morning when I come to the Word, I pray that God would reveal my blind spots to me. And some people, the problem is their blind spot is that they don't think they have any, right? It's like, what do you do with that? You pray that God reveals it. And so as the wisdom of God is poured out upon us through God's Spirit, let's reverence Him. Let's pursue Him. Let's grow in instruction. And let's seek this wisdom together submissively. Would you pray with me?